Continues tonight. NBC 15's Colton Molesky joins us now in studio.
Colton, the president touched on foreign affairs, politics working across the aisle, and his economic plan, focusing in on that bipartisan infrastructure law.
And Colton, you had a chance to speak with some people in the Wisconsin workforce this law would directly impact.
John Maria, the infrastructure law addresses a lot, improving roads and bridges, upgrading the power infrastructure, and investing in transportation. To find out how that impacts people and jobs right here in Wisconsin, I talked with one of the representatives for a union right here in the state.
What is certain is that this infrastructure bill is going to create jobs.
One of the topics of the State of the Union address and the focal point of President Joe Biden's speech in Madison, his economic plan.
It's also going to create apprenticeship opportunities, career pathways.
Political director for the Wisconsin Carpenters Union, Andrew Dish, is excited for the opportunities he says the infrastructure law will bring to Wisconsin.
It's also going to open up that career path to folks that want a good paying union job. Apprenticeship happens on the big projects, and because this money is going to be distributed all around the state of Wisconsin, it's going to create apprenticeship opportunities all around the state of Wisconsin.
Dish says the legislation, which will fund projects and jobs in a wide range of craftsmanship fields, will help bring the next generation to the workforce.
It's going to elevate the jobs and the trades. It's going to create those apprenticeship opportunities.
State Republicans are a bit more skeptical of the plan's success.
The one thing that the public sees it as is not working. The president's favorables and unfavorable are upside down in Wisconsin by over 10 points. So I think the public has judged the infrastructure plan and the Biden economy already.
Chairman of the Wisconsin GOP, Brian Schwimming, says the law meant to create more jobs is not working.
You have 166 million Americans right now who are living paycheck to paycheck. That's not success for Joe Biden.
Now, according to the White House, another hallmark of the infrastructure law is bipartisanship in legislation. It is something the president has called for repeatedly in the new year. Wisconsin GOP Chairman Brian Schwimming says he would like the White House to practice what it preaches. In studio, Colton Molesky, NBC 15 News.